My father signed the form while I was standing at the foot of my mother's hospital bed. He said it was what she would have wanted. He said it calmly, like he was renewing a subscription. The nurse glanced at me once, then back at the clipboard. My uncle stood near the window. No one asked me anything. No one explained the timing. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just watched him write his name in steady blue ink. The room felt very small after that. And I remember thinking I had just witnessed something I couldn't undo. My mother had been in the hospital for 6 days when the doctor first mentioned ventilation. Her lungs were failing slowly, not dramatically. There was time to consider options. That was what the doctor said. Time. My father didn't like that word. He asked practical questions. How much would it cost? What were the odds? How long would she be in intensive care? The doctor answered carefully. Nothing was certain. There was a chance she could recover enough to come home. There was also a chance she wouldn't. I stood beside the bed and watched my mother breathe through the oxygen mask. Her eyes were open. She was tired but aware. When the doctor asked if she had ever discussed end-of-life wishes, my father said yes immediately. My mother blinked slowly but didn't speak. He told the doctor she had always been clear about not wanting machines, that she hated hospitals, that she believed in letting nature take its course. It sounded rehearsed. Later, when the nurse stepped out, I asked him quietly if they had really talked about it. He looked at me like I had asked something inappropriate. Of course we did, he said. You weren't part of that conversation. That was true. In our family, decisions were made above me, not with me. My father handled finances, insurance, investments. My mother deferred to him in public, even when I could see hesitation in her face. Growing up, if I questioned anything, I was told I worried too much, or that I didn't understand how the real world worked. So when the hospital billing coordinator came by with paperwork, my father took her into the hallway. They spoke in low voices. I caught fragments. Coverage limits. Out-of-network charges. Extended ICU stay. He came back into the room looking resolved. That evening, he told me he had spoken to a lawyer about updating some documents, just in case. He said it was responsible. He said medical debt could wipe out everything they had saved. I asked him what everything meant. He didn't answer directly. 2 days later, the doctor explained that intubation could buy time. Not a miracle. Just time. My mother's hand twitched under the blanket. I leaned closer and told her I was there. My father interrupted. He told the doctor they would decline mechanical ventilation if it came to that. He referenced the prior discussion again. He said he didn't want her to suffer. There was a pause in the room. The doctor nodded slowly and made note. I felt something close in my chest, but I didn't speak. I had learned, over the years, that challenging my father publicly only hardened him. When the nurse brought in the DNR form, he signed it without hesitation. My mother's eyes were open. She was looking at him. This wasn't the first time my father had framed something as protection when it was really about control. When I was 12 and wanted to join a summer art program, he said it was too expensive. A week later, he bought himself a new set of golf clubs. He called it an investment in networking. I stopped asking for programs after that. When I was accepted into a university out of state, he encouraged me to choose the local one instead. He said it made more financial sense. I later found out he had already refinanced the house to expand his business. My tuition was never part of the long-term plan. Even my mother's part-time job had been described as optional. He handled the accounts. She signed where he pointed. He wasn't loud. He wasn't cruel in obvious ways. He just positioned himself as the only rational voice in the room. If anyone disagreed, he would sigh and ask who planned to pay the bill instead. That question ended most conversations. In the hospital, the pattern felt familiar. He spoke in numbers, risk percentages, cost projections. He used words like sustainability and liability. The doctors responded to his tone. Calm, logical, prepared. I was the daughter who asked about comfort, about whether my mother seemed afraid, about whether there was a way to try for a few more days. Each time, my father answered for her. She wouldn't want that. He said it so often it began to sound like a fact. On the second night after the DNR was signed, my mother's breathing worsened. A respiratory therapist adjusted the mask and mentioned intubation again, gently. My father repeated his decision. He stood firm. I looked at my mother and wondered if she felt the firmness. No one asked her directly. The following afternoon, a hospital social worker came by to review documents. My father mentioned life insurance in passing. He said they had planned responsibly, that he would be fine either way. Either way. That phrase stayed with me. I realized then that the decision wasn't just medical. It was financial. And in our family, finances had always outweighed my voice. The boundary was crossed the next morning. A nurse stepped into the hallway and asked for family consent regarding a possible intervention. My mother's oxygen levels had dropped sharply overnight. There was still a narrow window to intubate. The doctor said it wasn't ideal, but it wasn't impossible. I said we should try. My father looked at me with something close to annoyance. We already agreed, he said. Don't make this harder. The nurse shifted uncomfortably. She explained that if there was disagreement among immediate family, ethics would need to be consulted. It would delay everything. My father asked how long that would take. Hours, maybe longer. He exhaled slowly. Then he said, in front of the nurse, "She's emotional. I'm her husband. I'm responsible." He signed another confirmation. The nurse looked at me once, briefly. I didn't argue again. Not because I agreed. Because I understood something clearly. My father wasn't protecting my mother from machines. He was protecting himself from uncertainty. From expense. From losing control over how the story would be told later. That was the moment I stopped trying to be included. I stepped back from the bed. I held my mother's hand. And I let the decision stand. 2 days later, she was gone. The funeral was small. My father spoke about honoring wishes. About dignity. About not prolonging suffering. He said he had done what any loving husband would do. People nodded. He looked steady. 49 hours after she passed, the insurance company called. There had been a clause he hadn't read carefully. Because my mother had been alert and not legally incapacitated when the DNR was signed, and because documentation showed potential disagreement among immediate family, the payout required review. The ethics note from the nurse had been logged. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't simple. Then came something else. My mother's attorney contacted me directly. Months earlier, she had updated her will without my father knowing. She had left detailed instructions about medical decision-making. She had not authorized a blanket refusal of life-sustaining treatment. She had named me as her medical proxy if she was conscious and able to communicate. My father hadn't asked. He hadn't checked. He had assumed. When the paperwork surfaced, relatives began asking quiet questions. The hospital opened an internal review. The insurance hold triggered a financial strain he hadn't planned for. Accounts were frozen temporarily during the investigation. I didn't confront him. I didn't explain my side. I simply complied with requests for documents when asked. Over the next months, the story shifted. Not because I corrected it. Because records did. I moved into my own apartment that winter. Small. Quiet. Paid for with my own savings. I stopped attending every family gathering. When I think about those 49 hours now, I don't feel rage. I feel clarity. Some decisions are made to save money. Some cost everything. I chose to walk forward without arguing. And for the first time in my life, that felt like dignity. In the months that followed, no one raised their voice about what happened. They didn't need to. The paperwork did the speaking. The insurance investigation stretched longer than my father expected. Legal fees replaced the savings he had once guarded so tightly. Conversations with relatives grew shorter. Invitations became less frequent. People were polite, but careful. He never apologized. He never admitted he might have rushed the decision. Instead, he told the story the way he always had, that he did what was practical, that he acted responsibly. But something in the room changed whenever he said it. There was hesitation now. I didn't correct him. I didn't argue. I simply stopped participating in the version of events that erased my mother's voice. I kept copies of her documents in a folder in my apartment. Not as a weapon. Just as truth. Quiet truth. Sometimes I think about the moment he signed that form. The steady blue ink. The calm tone. The confidence. And I think about how fragile control really is. Money can feel solid. Authority can feel permanent. But both can shift when facts surface. I don't feel victorious. I feel settled. I visit my mother's grave once a month. I tell her about my work. About the small things she would have noticed. The way the light falls through my kitchen window in the morning. I don't ask if I did the right thing. I know I stood still when I needed to. And then I walked forward. That's enough for me.